I'm Jim Collison, live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on September 2nd, 2016. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you do have questions during this webcast, we do have a live chat room. It's available for you right below the main video window here on the live page. If you're at coaching.gallup.com/live, we have a chat room that's available for you. Bottom left-hand corner, just click on Log In. And then it will offer you some accounts. Choose the guest account, put your name in the guest, and click Submit. Super easy. Don't create a Chatwing account to do it. And we then can see you in the chat room. You can ask us live questions. If you are watching the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, give us an email. Just send it to us, coaching@gallup.com. By the way, that's a great email address just for your general questions as well. Or there is a contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com, for all your coaching resources and StrengthsFinder training needs. You can also catch the video. And we have a bunch of these videos now available for you. A couple hours of professional development if you're a coach every single week, available for downline or offline listening. They're all available off of our coaches blog. Don't forget, when you're on the coaches blog, there's a new resources tab that has all of our social media links. Really everything we have to everything is there on the coaches blog. So one site to get all the resources you need, coaching.gallup.com. Dean Jones is our host today. Dean's the principal architect of Gallup's global client learning strategy. It sounds super important. Dean, welcome.
It does
to Call to Coach. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for being here. And hello to all of you. Rhonda, it's great to see you. JB, it's great to see you. Ricardo from Venezuela, that's awesome. It's great that all of you are on. Today, the topic that I'm going to cover is the Johari Window, and specifically coaching around the Johari Window. I did a breakout session at the summit on the Johari Window that I was laughing with Jim before we started today. My breakout session at the Strengths Summit was called Coaching the Unseen, and it sounds like I was like, a little like a psychic phenomenon. It was like
you see dead people.
I see dead people apparently. It was a little like the Sixth Sense or something, right? So so I'm trying to in my naming, I'm trying to get a little better here. So today really is about coaching with the Johari Window. And after that session, I got a lot of emails from people that said, hey, would you be willing to record that? I wasn't at the session or I missed the session. I'd love to kind of talk through it with you all today. I thought I'd also add some stuff that I didn't get to cover in that session so that you have sort of a sense of there's some additional material that we didn't get to that I thought would be great to kind of throw in and talk through. So today, my intent is to cover that. I'd also love to get your questions. So I got an eye on the chat as we're going through this. So it's always better for me, and I think more productive for everybody if I'm able to speak to your questions and your comments around this. So as we go through this, it'd be great to have those. I think it makes it more productive and more relevant for everybody when we go through it. So I'm going to kind of dive in. I want to kind of talk through this, and really the intent of this, I know that we cover the Johari Window in the Accelerated Strengths Coaching course. And for a lot of people, they come out of it and they've got, some people, even before the course, have some familiarity with the Johari Window. For many people, it is their first exposure to that construct, to that model. It's a model that's been around for a long time and a real useful one. The whole intent of it is really around being able to help people it's a model for helping think through someone's growing self-awareness. So it's a great way to be able to think about your own self-awareness. And we know that for many people, strengths coaching really is just the process of increasing self-awareness, which we know then increases other awareness as well, right? That awareness of others and our relationships with those folks. So the whole intent of this is how do we help that process or help facilitate that process of self-awareness, and how do we get smart? How do we get smarter about how to use that model in a really meaningful way? The whole cool thing, and again, this was sort of the focus of that breakout session at the CliftonStrengths Summit, was to really deal with blind spots. So it's funny because Matt Mosser, who's our chief talent officer, has said before and says frequently that one of the things that's most deadly for leaders, particularly, is low self-awareness, and that self-awareness is so important. So as leaders, going in and hitting our blind spots, and being able to expand in those areas of our blind spots, it could be one of the most important things that we have to do. And I think also for us as coaches, that's really important, that we've got a real responsibility as coaches to be able to be thinking through our blind spots. So this is not just something that you use to coach people with. I think it's a great model for thinking about your own development, which has a direct impact then on your effectiveness as a coach.
Hey, Dean, can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah, please.
When we think of blind spots or basements, and we think of focusing on those and understanding and having awareness around them, and then the opposite end of that which is focusing and trying to improve them, there is a little bit of confusion sometimes where people only want to stay in the positive, right? They don't. Right. Can you address, from a coaching community standpoint, a Gallup standpoint, can you address just how we approach that real quick? And maybe that's a whole topic in itself, and it's like, Jim, that's a bad idea. But can you talk a little bit about that?
No, I love it, actually. So one is that blind spots and basements are actually two different things, right? So, and I think sometimes, by the way, they get confused. So it's really common for people. I think honestly, people get confused around blind spots, basements, and non-talents. Right. So sometimes it's like, and people get them all kind of mushed together, like this is evil and must be stopped, as opposed to that, gosh, those are, non-talents are those themes that we know just don't fire very frequently, right? Those are the things, and there's nothing wrong. They don't necessarily trip us up or even become a weakness, except if it's something that gets in the way of us being able to work with our strengths, right? And in fact, just the awareness, sometimes people want to go to work on their non-talents or those themes that are at the bottom of their theme profile. Non-talents, there's really nothing to go to work on, right? The only thing to go work on relative is it's just great to have awareness. For me, my number 34 is harmony. I'm just never a guy that walks into a room and says, gosh, we need to get consensus here. I'm just never, and I'm not necessarily the guy to be able to say, a lot of my best partners lead with a lot of harmony. And so a lot of the people that I work closely with at Gallup and that I love to work with, because they can walk into a room and say, okay, they can sense there's alignment. Or when we're thinking through how are we going to implement something, they lead with, let's go get consensus. And that's probably the last thing that I'm going to do, right? I'm like, I got command number 10 and self-assurance number 11. I'm like, no, this is right, and we should do it, and let's make this happen, right? Activator number 1, right? So one is, as a non-talent, it just doesn't fire, right? Or it fires so infrequently as to be immaterial, right? So that's non-talents. With basements really are those elements, those expressions of our talents themselves that are expressed in a way where that we're not contributing, right? And where it may trip us up, it may trip others up. So they're actually, I think sometimes we think of the basement of our themes as things that we've got to suppress or something, or that we've got to manage. They're actually a huge contribution. It's just, how are we contributing those? And are we contributing those in ways that are really fastenable? So, like for instance, with my activator, I love to talk about my activator because I'm really passionate about it. I think it's great. And sometimes people, like I have a big sense of urgency, right? Around everything that I do, I get involved in, and I'm like, I just can't wait, right? And there's times that is a huge contribution and a huge expression, but there's times that's not a great expression, right? But it's the same talent. It's not like it's a part of my talent that I got to squash. If I squash it, I squash my talent, right? So it's that piece where it's the piece where I need to just be thinking about how am I expressing it in ways that really contribute and advance what we're doing around here. And that's sort of the connection. I think that's where it gets connected to blind spots. Oh, if I don't have great awareness, of how it's landing, if I don't have great awareness of how it's being received by others, then it becomes an issue for me, right? And that's where the basements of our themes and blind spots sometimes get connected, right? So I think that's an important piece. Blind spots are just, and to your point, Jim, blind spots are just a metaphor, because sometimes we start talking about blind spots, and we got to remember, like literally, yeah, we do have blind spots. You can't see out of the back of your head, right? Nobody's ever seen the back of their own head. But we got to remember, blind spots are just a metaphor that we use to describe those areas where others can see something in us that we're unaware of, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, we call it blind spots, but it's just those things that others see, and they see in us and they see around us that we're not aware of. And part of it is there's huge power in blind spots, just huge power. And that's why it's such a powerful part of coaching. The hard part about blind spots is, by definition, we don't see it. So when I get feedback that's dead square in the middle of my blind spot, just dead. Sorry, I'm laughing at Rhonda. Rhonda said, mamas can see from the back of their heads. Yes, I know this. Yes, I had a mother who could see across the house, from one room to another, right?
Miles away. From miles away, they see.
Yeah, what are you doing on the phone, right? Sorry, Rhonda, you made me laugh. By definition, you don't see your blind spot. So when you get feedback that's like square in your blind spot, you're like, what? That's not true, right? And that's how you know you got really great feedback. So sometimes we get feedback about stuff that we're aware of but not managed, or we're aware of but haven't accepted, right? Sometimes we get feedback and it's like, whoa, where is this coming from? But a lot of times it's just dead center in the middle of our blind spot. And by definition, we don't see it, right? We don't see it. And that becomes really powerful feedback for us. It becomes feedback that's really, really, really useful for us. And it can be one of those moments in coaching where you're helping somebody. A lot of times what's hard about coaching in blind spots is people initially oftentimes just reject it outright. They just go, gosh, that's just not true. I don't know. That person's crazy. Why would they be saying that? And a lot of times when you're coaching somebody, and they're getting feedback right in the middle of a blind spot. It's like, a lot of it is just that process of being able to say, so let's try on for a minute. What if that were true? What would that mean? Right? If that person wasn't crazy and saw something that you don't see, right? What would be the impact? How would you feel about that? What would that be like for you, right? So that people can start to actually really start to confront, okay, what if this is true, and how do I be responsible for something that I may not see myself, right? And that's really, really, really powerful for people. Right. And so part of what I do when I'm coaching people oftentimes, and they're dealing with feedback, is to help them to get really interested in the feedback that seems like you had no inkling of it. Because ultimately, that's the most powerful stuff. It's also really great, I will tell you, when you're coaching people is like, I try to, as funny as this sounds, self-feedback a lot, is to really help them to say, gosh, you want to be somebody, particularly if you're in a role where you influence other people. You're a manager, you're a leader in an organization. You want to be somebody that's really, really committed to feedback. You're interested in it. You're asking people for it all the time. You're really committed to feedback because it's just so important, right? One of the things I think is important for you all, and we talked about this in the session that I led at the summit, right? I think it's important for you all as coaches, and this is a little bit of homework, I'd say, is to think about a time when you discovered something you didn't know about yourself, right? Or you received feedback that you struggled to accept, or you realized something that explained kind of a pattern in your life. So think about when that happened. So there's been times I could say, gosh, you get that feedback and you say, gosh, that just cannot be true, right? Or you start to say, gosh, if that's true, that sure explains a lot for me. I've had those. And think about the process you went. How did you discover it? right? How did you feel when you discovered it? What happened as a result? I think all those things are super important. And one is, I think it gives you a lot of empathy for the process that people go through when they get that kind of feedback. And I think it's important to have a ton of empathy, because when we're integrating something that seems so out of left field for us, it's hard. And it just never gets, it's the hardest part, I think, of development. You know, we all like those points when we're developing in an area and we feel like we're succeeding and we're winning. I think the part of development that is just painful for folks is when you got to be responsible for something that you don't see and you don't really want to be responsible for, and you're not sure is true, you know? And yet at the same time, everybody around you is saying, yeah, this is an issue or a problem, right? And, you know, this is something that you're doing that's derailing all of us, and you may not see it, but we all see it, you know? So like that. So I think it's just super powerful, right? I think the Johari window, I want to talk about the construct just so we can kind of get into the construct. And boy, JB, I just saw your comment that trust is huge in understanding this feedback. 100%. That's an excellent point, because I will tell you, yes, it's the delivery, as to your point, it's the delivery of the feedback is important, but also this is where, as we talk about that first conversation that you have, first coaching conversation you have, is trusting your coach, right? Trusting the source of the feedback, whether it's your manager, whether it's your coach, whether it's somebody who's a great mentor for you, trusting that person has your best interest at heart and is going to do, even though they may be delivering a hard message. You know, I have been, Matt Mosser, who's the Chief Talent Officer at Gallup, has been my manager for the last, I guess for the last 9 years. And he's just somebody that I just trust implicitly. And he's given me a lot of just great hard feedback over the years. And part of why it's been so valuable for me is I trust him. And I trust that he knows me. I trust he's got my best intention at heart. And I trust that he wants the right things for me. Right. And I think that's the kind of relationship that you want to have, as I've had coaches over the years, as I've had other people that were my manager or the person that I work for. Having that kind of relationship is super important. So yeah, I think it's important. So let's talk a little bit about the Johari window, because I think it's a useful construct, particularly for you as a coach. So let me just talk about what it is first, just so that we level set, that everybody's familiar with it. It's been around for a long time. It was created in 1955 by two guys, Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingram. Right. And it was funny when I first heard of it, the Johari window, it sounded sort of vaguely exotic to me. Like it was like some sort of African inspired, you know,
came out of the jungle.
It came out of the jungle, right? Like it was it sounded vaguely, you know, like, and it's literally two guys, Joe and Harry. That's why it's called the Johari window. And I just think I think that's just so funny. It's like, it's right on. If you read kind of the original writing, this was first introduced in 1955. It was really a model not only for self-awareness, but to work with group dynamics. And that's one of the things I like to use it a lot around engendering self-awareness and in working with individuals. But it really works on three different dimensions. It works in dealing with the self, it works in dealing with groups, and it works in dealing with intergroup relationships, right? So in dealing with yourself, in dealing with dynamics within the group, intra-group, and in dealing with dynamics between groups, intergroup relationships. So it really works on all three of those levels, right? And the way that it works is it really is designed to kind of take input from two sources, from what you know about yourself and what others know about you, and really kind of map that a little bit so you can get a handle on where you are vis-a-vis your self-awareness. And so it takes those two sources, yourself and others, to be able to think about thoughts, feelings, assumptions, performance data, to kind of map all that together. I will tell you, it's the Johari window. It is very theoretical. It's kind of conceptual. Sometimes I think that as people get into it, they wonder, like, how practical is this really? I don't know that you're going to sit down and make a map of everything that you know about yourself, everything you don't know about yourself, right? Like from that standpoint, it's not like a practical tool where I'm going to write everything in the different quadrants, but it helps me to start to think. And I think oftentimes as a framework, the utility of it is actually better for coaches than it is for the client that you're working with, right? So it's actually better, I think, for you as a coach, as a way of thinking about it, than it is necessarily for the client that you're working for. Jim, if you want to put up that slide, this is, Jim, we've got a slide here that talks about what the Johari window is. And it's just a really super simple slide. I modified it slightly from the one that we show you in the accelerated course, just to simplify it a little bit. And really in the Johari window, again, there's two sources of information. So along the top, you see the self, and then along the side, you see others. So, and you're really looking at, what do you know about yourself? What's known to you about yourself, and what's not known to you, and then what's known to others and what's not known to others. And by mapping those together, you end up with 4 quadrants. And these 4 quadrants are, you kind of lay out these 4 quadrants where you can kind of map everything. The first quadrant is what's called the open area. And sometimes this is called the arena. And it's really an area of free activity where your behavior, your motivation is known to you and it's known to others, right? So, and there's kind of that alignment there, like what I know about myself is also what others know about me. So there's a kind of authenticity, there's kind of an alignment, everything that kind of lives in that open area. It feels like it is all sort of above board, right? And consistent with my reputation or my brand, right? Where I know this about myself, others know about it of me and expect it of me. So it's all kind of aligned there, right? The second quadrant is that area of blind spots, or the blind area. This is where there's things that others see about me that I don't see about myself, right? So others know this, would say, gosh, we know this about you, and you don't know about it yourself. So like, for instance, it's like if everybody got together and said in a room, and I wasn't there, and they said, oh, what do we all know about Dean? It's, it's all this stuff. Some of it would probably hit in the open area, but there'd be things that they touch on that they'd say, gosh, we all know this about Dean, but Dean doesn't know this about himself, right? And generally speaking, the knowing of which would actually make a difference. So if it's those things that I know about myself, I can be responsible about them in new ways. There's also the area that's the hidden area, or the avoided area, right? So it's the things that I know about myself, but others don't know about me. And I always think that's a funny area for people. I think sometimes as coaches, we struggle a little bit with that hidden area, or that avoided area, because it's kind of like, gosh, if I know it about myself, why wouldn't I want to express that? But it could be, a lot of what we're dealing with in that hidden area, that avoided area, might be things that we haven't fully accepted about ourselves. So things that I would say, both strengths and weaknesses, that we say, gosh, I know I get triggered by this, or I know that I have difficulty with this, and I don't want people to know that about me. It also might be places where I know I could make a contribution in this area, or I feel like I can make a contribution in this area, but the risk associated with it would be too great. So it could be an area where we say, gosh, I tried to contribute this before, it wasn't well received, so I don't want to contribute this again. Or I feel like I'm uncertain how well it would be received, and if people would embrace that if I contributed it. So there's things that sit in that hidden area where it's like, gosh, I know this about myself, but others don't know this about me. And then there's the unknown area, and this is the part where I think people want to get, by definition, it's unknown. So you don't know it about yourself, other people don't know it about you. And I think that area is really intangible for people. I think sometimes, it's like, okay, what do you do with it? Well, there's not much you can do with it because you don't know it about yourself and other people don't know it about you. And so it's really the area of discovery. And I do think that it's an area where, gosh, big breakthroughs come out of that area. I was in a course once where this area was described as what you don't know that you don't know. So there's things that you don't know, and you're clear you don't know those things. But there's also those areas that you don't know that you don't know. That's really what lives in that unknown area. The example I like to give of this area, I don't know if you've seen the Britain's Got Talent video of Susan Boyle, that first time that she came and sang. She was on Britain's Got Talent. And, when you see her, like she looks like kind of she looks like kind of this person that's lived in a small town in Britain, which is what she was, and had mostly just sung at church, right? And so I don't think she had any real calibration on how good she was, right? And she came out, and you looked at the panel of judges, and they look at her and they said, gosh, she doesn't look like a world-class singer. This is not she doesn't match our image of what a world-class singer is. And then all of a sudden she opens her mouth and sings, right? And you can see what was so cool for me about that video is you see, you see all the judges, their mouths drop open, right? Because she opens her mouth to sing, and it's like the voice of angels here, right? I mean, she's just like the voice of angels just comes out of her, right? And at the same time, in the way that people reacted, you could see she was discovering about herself, that she didn't know how great she was, and she really discovered it about herself. That's, I think, a great example of kind of that unknown area where we're discovering stuff other people are discovering about us, sometimes at the same time, right? Where it feels like we just didn't know this, and it's a whole new area. So as the idea here is with the Johari window, as we learn about areas of our blind spots, as we express things that are in that hidden or avoided area, as we discover things that are in that unknown area, they move into the arena, right? They move into that open area. So that process of self-awareness, that process of self-actualization really is expanding that open area, right? So as you become more self-aware, as you become more self-actualized, if you will, that open area grows and those other areas decrease over time. So, and that's really that process of self-awareness is really expanding that open area. So I know it about myself. Other people know it about me. I've integrated it in positive and productive ways into my behavior, and I'm able to further kind of contribute my talents and my strengths in meaningful ways. So that's really the whole process here. So as you're thinking about this, it's a way to be able to start to think about people and to say, as you think about the people that you're coaching, gosh, what do they know about themselves and what would other people say about them? What's that piece that's a blind spot for them? What's that piece that may be hidden or avoided? And what's that piece that that we may be discovering? And then maybe not, it's not like you're going to be able to make a list of that unknown area, but the things that we want to start to do to elicit discoveries there. Typically, the access to the blind area is feedback. So as we think about what expands that open area, typically the access to that blind area, to blind spots, is feedback. And that's why we were talking earlier about receiving feedback and being committed and interested in feedback makes a huge difference. Is that really the access to that is feedback. The access really to that hidden or avoided area is that being willing to kind of calibrate risk and to be able to step out and err on the side of self-expression rather than self-regulation. So the more we're willing to express rather than regulate, the more that we start to see. And a lot of times, I for a long time I led community leadership courses, many years, and a lot of it was helping people to be able to step out and start to express in ways that are meaningful, and to be able to rethink that kind of risk calculation around, okay, if I step out and say what I'm committed to, or say the vision that I have, or say what I'm standing for, right? That and say that and engage people in really meaningful ways, what would happen? And it's helping people kind of rethink that risk calculation so that they're able to express themselves in more meaningful ways. And I think as that process happens and we have life experiences, and we grapple with things, it gives us forays into the unknown area. So I want to, as coaches, I think it's useful for you, Jim. You can pull down the slide. I think it's useful for you as coaches to think about the people that you've coached, right? And so as you coach leaders and managers, what are the common blind spots they possessed? And to start to get a sense of, okay, what have I typically seen over and over again? And how did those blind spots impact their effectiveness? So what do you see relative to their effectiveness? And then what is the impact then also on the teams and the organizations that they have? Because there's always an impact, right? There's always something that's an impact, even if the impact really is just lost opportunity. But I think it's important to be able to think through those things. One of the things that I've used as in thinking about blind spots that I found was really was really helpful. I wonder if I've got this. Yeah, I sure do. Hang on. Is this book? And I've encouraged a lot of people to read it. It's called Why CEOs Fail. So I read it a number of years ago. It's a great book. It's written by Dave Dotlich and Peter Cairo. It's the stuff where Dotlich and Cairo actually looked at top executives, and they looked at a set of what they described as derailers, as sort of common leadership derailers, and that were things that there were 11 things that they in an early way they identified that were things that were behaviors that would help derail someone's success. And let me just read through them just so you have a sense of what's on the list, right? Arrogance, you think you're right and everyone else is wrong. Melodrama, you need to be at the center of attention. Jim is nodding his head here. Volatility, you're subject to mood swings. Excessive caution, you're afraid to make decisions. Habitual distrust, you focus on the negatives. Aloofness, you're disengaged and disconnected from people. Mischievousness, you believe that rules are made to be broken. And certainly in a leadership position, that sometimes is hard, right? Eccentricity, you try to be different just for the sake of being different. Passive resistance, what you say is not what you really mean, or what you really believe. Perfectionism, you get the little things right and the big things wrong. And eagerness to please, you're trying to win the popularity contest. So those 11 derailers were common things that they saw in executives and senior leaders, right? And the reason I connect them is I think that they're as you think about the leaders and managers that you've coached, there's common things that you see over and over again. And I love this list because I think the book is actually a really good book. I shouldn't say actually, the book is a really good book, and I think it's really very useful for identifying some of the things some of the things that you see as common blind spots. Originally, by the way, this was based on the work of Robert Hogan. So Hogan was the first one that came up with these, and then were incorporated then into Dotlich and Cairo's work. So just to give credit where credit is due, that Dotlich and Cairo drew on that work, right? I think it's really useful to be thinking about those things. And the reason I like it is you start to identify those. The thing I like to do when I'm thinking about this is to contrast it with the work that we did at Gallup around the needs of followers. So this is the piece where I think it's really interesting. I don't know if you all have read. Boy, I've got all these books. You'd think that I had planned this, right? But I'm a guy who loves books. You can tell from my office, right? So I got all these books in my office, but I've got my strengths-based leadership book handy. That almost sounds like a prop, right? Like I have this right at hand, but I happen to be using this week. But one of the things we did is we did this study in between 2005 and 2008, where we looked at 10,000 followers who were contacted via the Gallup poll, right? So if you think about that list I just gave you, you can contrast it with these needs of followers. This study, and which is written up in the strengths-based leadership book. Yeah, and I agree, JB, it's really a good book, right? In this study, one of the things that was really cool and interesting about this study as a leadership study is most leadership studies look at the qualities of the leader, right? Do you have this? Do you have that, right? And so they're looking at the characteristics that the leader has, right? Versus looking at what are the needs of the followers from the leader, right? So it's a different angle into leadership. And that's what I think makes it so interesting and so distinct is you're looking at what is it that leaders provide for followers, not just what are the personal characteristics that the leader has. And if you've read the book, you know, we came up with 4 needs of followers, right? So trust, stability, compassion, and hope. So do you create trust as a leader? Or that leaders have, you know, is there a sense of stability? Is there a sense of compassion? And is there a sense of hope, right? So if you contrast those 4 things with those derailers that I just talked about, it's like night and day, right? If you're creating trust, stability, compassion, and hope, it creates a high degree of certainty. And obviously, you're meeting the needs of followers in a way that's really powerful, and that helps kind of bolster your leadership. I also think, and this is my assertion, is that if you're focused on those things, you're more likely to be able to unconceal, to reveal your blind spots and deal with them in productive and powerful ways than if you're not, right? So if you're focused on yourself as a leader, it's tough to do that, right? Because you're trying to protect you're trying to protect yourself. If you're focused on meeting those needs of followers, trust, compassion, stability, and hope, you're working on those, then it's easier that when those blind spots get unconcealed, as they invariably do. I mean, it's just kind of that what's in the very definition or the very nature of leadership is that happens. It's easier to be able to deal with those, get the feedback you need, integrate it in ways that are really powerful. So I think that's really important. One of the cool things, and now I sound like I'm plugging the book, but I'm plugging the book, okay? One of the cool things about the book is then it goes through all 34 themes and say, how do you as a leader use each one of your 34 themes to be able to meet those needs? So how do you go through and do that in ways that are really important, right? And to be able to do that. The way that I have worked with in people that I've coached over the years around blind spots, that is sort of a time-honored way, and I would assume for many of you, you've done something similar. But that the way that I have worked with a lot of folks in this area is to have them do some kind of self-discovery interview, where they go out and they go interview the people in their environment, and to be able to find out, gosh, how do you see me? And how do you see me? What do you know about me that I don't know about myself, right? And one of the things, there's 6 questions that I've used in the past that I think are really powerful questions. They're not magical questions. You don't have to use these questions, but there's 6 questions that I've gone back again and again. And when I talk to my pals who are coaches that I respect and have talked through these questions, invariably they use some version of the same questions, and they've said, gosh, those are questions that are good questions. And so I want to give you these 6 questions because I think it's super simple. And when people go out and interview people in their environment that they have, you're not going to be able to ask a ton of questions typically, right? So you gotta hone it down, right? So here's the 6 questions I typically use. First of all, asking people, what are my strengths? So what do you see my strengths are? And invariably, people, I would tell you, are surprised. That people see their strengths, people, that people walk away really having an experience of being recognized, and that people really see their strengths, they really value their strengths. I think people always underestimate how much they're valued, right? So the first question is, what are my strengths? Second question is, where do you see my strengths in action? And I think that's a really important question. It sounds like a simple one, but asking people, where do you see my strengths in action? It points to, where do you see my strengths having an impact? Where do you see my strengths on the court? What is the, now I wonder if I've got oh gosh, I do. Okay. There we go. I keep pulling books here. But if our pal Don Clifton, if you read "Soar with Your Strengths," right? And I'll botch this quote, but Don said, "We're never so strong as when we have our strengths in mind." Right? Is that right? Did I botch the quote? It's close to that, right? And so one of the things we know is one of the best ways to develop our strengths is to study our own successes. Right? Is to have a sense of our own successes. And so when we're interviewing people and we're asking them, where do you see my strengths in action? We're helping to really get a sense of, where do you see me being successful? So that I'm clear what's having an impact, and I can kind of think about, okay, what talents am I using, or how am I using my talents in ways that are really meaningful, right? So what are my strengths? Where do you see my strengths in action? What are my weaknesses is the third question. Right? What are my weaknesses? It's a really powerful question. I know that it's so funny. People that don't love us you know, or like to poo-poo the strengths movement, love to say that we don't focus on weaknesses, and nothing can be further from the truth. One of the best ways I will tell you, one of the best ways to, I think, understand your strengths is to also understand your weaknesses. And one of the things that I see over and over and over again, I saw it myself, but then I saw it in people I coached, and I see it, gosh, I tell you time and time again, is the more people understand their own talents and strengths and get comfortable with them, the more comfortable they are with their own weaknesses. They're much more forthcoming in being able to say, oh, I'm not good at that, right? As opposed to, I tell you, people that don't know their own strengths or aren't confident in their own strengths feel like they've got to be self-protective around those areas where they have weaknesses, or they have to sort of claim stuff that's not them. You can really tell somebody who's really invested a lot of time in developing their strengths because they're really forthcoming, and they can say, oh, yeah, I'm really bad at that, right? You know, like for me, I always laugh because one of the things I'm just awful at is process stuff. I'm just not a process guy, right? And I got great partners that are, but it's really being able to say, gosh, what are those areas that you know are your weaknesses and you can account for? And asking people, what are my weaknesses? I think people sometimes flinch, you know, they twitch when they ask that question because it's like, do I really want to know the answer? It's so great to be able to ask that question and then just shut up and let people talk, right? Because a lot of times people will say initially, I don't see any weaknesses in you, because they love you. You know what I mean? And then they'll say, yeah, you try to do this and you shouldn't do this, right? Or every time you try to do that, you get tangled up in it. Or, you think that you should do this and you don't really need to do this. And we really want you to focus over here. So, so asking that question, it's just a really powerful, great question, particularly if you can shut up and just take notes and just consider what people are saying, because it'll really give you access to those blind spots. The fourth question, is what does everybody know about me? So what does everybody know about me? When they all get together and they talk about me, what does everybody uniformly, what does everybody know? And another kind of version of that question, number 5, is when people in our organization describe me to others, what do they say? That gives you a sense of your reputation, your brand, right? How you're known. It also gives you kind of clues to what are people saying is really your impact, right? Because we know as people develop, when people develop inside their strengths, they don't get broader. In sort of the conventional notion of development and the conventional notion of development, the idea is that you're plugging all your weaknesses and you broaden out, right? In fact, we know that in strengths-based development, that's not the case. And it really, it's one of the big things where I think people hold on to that model of conventional development, is they think like the more I use my strengths, the broader I should be. And in fact, that's not the case. What happens really, what you see in people that have really developed their strengths, is they get more narrow. They get more focused. They focus more on the things that they're great at. They're not trying to play all the positions on the field. They get clear about what's the position they're playing, and they hone that, and they get so that they can play that position in a really world-class way. So, and a lot of it is that process of understanding what I'm good at, understanding the impact I'm having, focusing more on that, and being willing to give up those other areas. And sometimes that's the part that's really, really hard for people, is giving up those areas. Last question is, and this is just a super powerful one, right? Is what's missing in my leadership that would make a difference? What's missing in my leadership that would make a difference? We know that for most people, their thinking is like right, wrong, good, bad. Right, wrong, good, bad. I like this, I don't like this. That thinking is not necessarily super high level thinking, right? And so the piece that's really powerful is when you can say, gosh, what's missing? What's missing in my leadership that would make a difference? So let me just read those 6 questions again, just to kind of repeat them so you've got them. What are my strengths? Number 1, what are my strengths? Number 2, where do you see my strengths in action? Number 3, what are my weaknesses? Number 4, what does everybody know about me? What does everyone know about me? Number 5, when people in our organization describe me to others, what do they say? And number 6, what's missing in my leadership that would make a difference? And so those 6 questions, I think, are really powerful questions. So you equip people with those questions and say, hey, go interview some people in your environment, and set them up, let them know you want really candid feedback, and that you want to be able to use that feedback in a way that's powerful. And so that they can go get that kind of feedback. I will tell you, it really makes a difference. What it starts to unconceal for people is what does everybody know about me that I may not know about myself? What are the blind spots that I have? Right? Well, what are the blind spots and how could I start to deal with it? And there's stuff that I will tell you, typically when you hear people, when people report back from having done this, one is they're blown away by how much people love them. So that consistently you see, like they're blown away by the value that they provide for others. There's stuff that it confirms for people. So there's stuff that you can see that it really confirms for people where they can say, gosh, I sort of knew that about myself, or I knew that about myself, but I really see that, and it really brought it to life. And then there's pieces, that are a surprise for people. And the pieces that are the surprise for people are the ones that are honestly are probably the most valuable pieces. It's like, holy cow, I never knew that. Or holy cow, I didn't see that about myself. And there's really the opportunity to be responsible for something that they weren't responsible for before. So let's take some questions here as we go through this, just so we know. I know, Jim. So let me just, Jim, why don't you read through the questions and feed me the questions? I'm going to start with JB's last question because it's the one I just saw. JB asked, JB King. Yay, JB King. Are there any tips on encouraging others to be really fully honest in answering these questions? Yes, I would say here's a couple tips. One is the whole doing this all lives in the setup, right? So really being somebody that says, hey, look, I'd love to have some time with you. I want to ask you some questions because I'm working on my own development. I want to really understand how to use my strengths more effectively, how to use my talents more effectively, right? And I'd love to get some feedback from you. People are typically pretty honored if that you asked them, right? So just so you know, people are set up to be able to do that, right? So I'd love to be able to do that. The thing that I would tell you really makes a difference is to say to people, look, I want you to know I want your most direct feedback, right? I want your toughest feedback here, or I want your most direct feedback. I want you to be really candid with me, and you can count on that I want it, and I'm going to use that for my development. Right? So that you sometimes it may be it may feel like it's enough that it's implicit in the conversation. It's not enough to really make it explicit at the beginning of the conversation. Hey, I really want your candid feedback, and hey, I'm really going to use this for my development. The other things that I tell you will make a difference are, one is make sure there's enough time that's set aside for this. If it's rushed, you don't get the same value out of it. They don't get to talk and like that. Because a lot of times with people, you ask them a question, they give you kind of the first answer off the top of their head, and then they think about it a minute and they ask and they answer the question in a deeper level. So it's oftentimes with these questions is asking the question, they give you an answer and just say, is there anything else? Or, let me ask the question again. What do you think my strengths are? Right. And so that you really get people's thinking around it. And if you're rushed, that stuff doesn't happen. The other thing is, gosh, and I think is probably the most, it sounds funny to say, but probably the most powerful piece of this, powerful coaching you give to somebody is keep your mouth shut. Like shut up and take notes. Ask the question and don't comment on it. Right? Because if you start commenting on it, what you're going to do, people don't have the same permission to give you feedback. So if you're judging the feedback or agreeing with the feedback or disagreeing with it or whatever you're doing with it, just listen. And just listen to the feedback, take good notes. The reason I like to take notes, and part of it's just I'm high in communication. So I got communication number 6. So keeping my mouth shut sometimes is almost impossible for me. So the only way I can deal with it is take good notes, right? But it also helps to be able to, sometimes in the moment, I know with my woo and my activator, I got all this energy up top in my themes, right? And I get real energized positively and negatively, right? So it's really useful for me to take notes and then go back and look at the notes after the emotion has subsided, right? So after the emotion has subsided and I'm looking at the notes, then it helps me to be able to go through that process and really integrate that feedback in a way that's really meaningful for me. So I think that's a really important thing. So,
Dean, let me ask you a question from Rhonda. How influential or how much is the Johari window being used? Do our coaches use it when we think of our corporate coaches who are out there? Is it standardized? How well is it being used in the industry? Do you have any feel for that?
Yeah, here's the thing. Yes, of course. I shouldn't say of course. Yes, I've got a sense of that, right? So yeah, that was clearly my self-assurance, right?
Let's talk about your blind spots, Dean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no lack of confidence, right? So probably actually lack of confidence, just high self-assurance. Okay, so let's just be truthful there. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is the Johari window's been around forever, right? It's been around since 1955. It's widely used. It's considered sort of a fundamental model around self-awareness. Again, I kind of said this at the beginning, but it's I think it's got more power for the coach than it is for the client, right? I think that for the client, it's like, okay, make a list of your blind spots. Well, there's not going to be anything on the list, right? But for you, as you start to work with a client and you start to be able to say, okay, what would I say? What would I put in each one of these categories, right? And what are the things as I start to think about this person's development? What would we say is in the open area? What are their blind spots that we know that I'm getting some sense that from people around them or from 360s or from feedback I've got from their manager are blind spots? What are the things where it feels like that they are overregulating, right? That are hidden areas or are areas where they're unwilling to fully express themselves. So and Rhonda, to your question, yeah, you could. I don't think you have to. The piece I think is really important. I will tell you, with me, I don't necessarily write it on a grid to be able to do this, and you sure could, right? But I think what's useful is to be able to reference the model. So what I often do is I'm thinking about the model as I'm coaching, as I'm taking notes with people. I'm sort of noting those things that I think fall in each one of those areas, each one of those arenas, right? So that I think is really powerful and really important. One of the things I said, and I said this in the session. But one of the things that you got to remember is for all of us, we have intentions, right? We all have intentions about the work that we do, right? Or about who we think we are, who we want to be, right? But you got to remember that actions are more important than intentions, right? So people, you judge yourself by your intentions. Other people judge you by your actions, right? So how your intentions translate into behavior, that's really the important thing. And I would tell you that the gap between what I intended and what I produced is a measure really of how effectively we're applying our talents and developing our strengths. It's a measure really of our own power, right? Is that we can close the gap between what I intended and what I produced, right? And it's because that ultimately, it's kind of like saying, this is what my intention is. This is what I want to create. The ability to then make that happen powerfully is a function of how effective we are in being able to use our talents and our strengths.
Tracy in the chat room kind of suggests, or she's as a brainstorming, she's saying, hey, take these questions, use them as pre-work for group sessions as teams are getting together to kind of open up those. And then I think, Dean, as a manager, I might even take the Johari window and start plugging those responses in from a team setting or on an individual basis.
Sure.
And get that feedback loop going.
Yeah, and again, the answers, what it's designed to do is provoke insights, right? So those interviews are designed to provoke insights, and so when we start to provoke insights, and then there's a discussion around that, right? So what we're doing is we want to be able to provoke all those things and have those up on the table, so then we can work on that process of integration, right? I love Maureen. Hi, Maureen. By the way, it's great that you're here. So good to see you, my friend. I love I love the thing you said. I can still remember when my brother told me I was a controlling person 25 years ago, right? It's like we all have those moments, and it's one of the things I think is powerful is it gives us sort of an understanding of that process and the power around that process when we can think about those moments when we've gotten feedback, that was in many cases different than what we intended, right? It wasn't, it probably wasn't a moment where you said, gosh, I want to be super controlling and suppress the crap out of people, right? No, it was like, really, I want to make sure things work well or whatever your intent was. But again, that gap between what I intended and what I produced is really a measure of how effective we are in applying our talents, right? So, other questions, Jim, here?
Dean, none that I see, and we're getting close to kind of our time. We'll give maybe for one more. Dean, a year ago we did a Gallup Learning Series, and you taught a bunch in that, and I said, hey, we should have you teach more on Called to Coach, and really glad that after a session like this, we're at 55 minutes, and that just flies by. And I know there's a lot of great input from the coaches that are out there. And just a reminder, it's all recorded, so you can go back. Many of you are gonna want to go back and take some notes during this session. So great job on that, Dean. And I think with that, any final thoughts from you as we kind of wrap it?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, right, the cool thing about using the Johari window, and particularly about dealing with blind spots, right, is there's always that opportunity. We're sort of standing at the doorway of responsibility, right? So we all like to think of ourselves as responsible people, right? And when we see something that's a blind spot, or we may see something that's an unintended consequence of our talents and our strengths, there's always that choice about, am I willing to be responsible for that? And it's that moment, if we're willing to take responsibility and say, gosh, you know what? I didn't intend that, but that happened, right? Or I didn't see that, but now I see that. There's always that choice. And that's the big thing in coaching, is helping people to get comfortable taking responsibility for that. That piece of responsibility, that willingness to choose to be responsible is where people get the power in this whole thing, right? And it's always a choice for us. There's always a degree to which we say, gosh, I'm responsible. You look at great leaders and they say things like, I choose to be responsible for climate change. I choose to be responsible for the conflict in Syria. I choose to be responsible for hunger in the world, right? So there's always that degree to which we're willing to choose to be responsible. And I think that's ultimately, as coaches, where we can help people. So those are my final thoughts. I'm psyched. I'm going to be on soon, right? So toward the end of this month again, talking about learning sessions. So I'm excited about that one too, because that really came out of the CliftonStrengths Summit. So we'll talk more about that next time.
Yeah, Dean, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on today. Always good to catch up with you. And I think the coaches enjoy hearing from you. So thanks for your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center. Just gallupstrengthcenter.com. Send us your questions or comments. If you've got additional questions for Dean, you can send those in to us. Send those to coaching@gallup.com. We love your questions, and we love to get the feedback, so send those in. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones. Our links to our Facebook group, YouTube page, iTunes, RSS feeds, iPhone, Android apps, all those things. By the way, brand new update this week to the Strengths app that's out there. So if you're on Android or iPhone and you're using our Strengths app, one of, I think, a few updates are going to be coming over the next several months. We've kind of got a whole team working on that again, and so if we break something, let us know. We probably will as we add new functionality to it. The sharing options are now available in the app, so if people are sharing their results with you or you with them, those will now show up in the app. It's available. All that information is available on our coaches blog, coaching.gallup.com. Don't forget, if you're interested in becoming a certified coach or have some questions about it, our courses site is a great place to start. You just head over to courses.gallup.com, and everything we offer in every city around the world is available to you off the courses site. If you have any questions when you get there, just send us an email at certification@gallup.com. And just a reminder that in the next couple weeks, I think, I'm going to go out on a limb. We're going to have some announcements about being able to register for the next CliftonStrengths Summit. So super exciting. You're going to want to watch that site, CliftonStrengthsSummit.com, to become open. And we've got a lot of information coming on that as well. We're super excited to be able to announce that 9 months in advance. So watch for that information coming out. If you found this helpful, we'd ask that you share it. And with that, we'll thank everyone for coming out. Dean, thanks again. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.